Hi, and welcome to another watch list. My what used to be weekly look at what I've been watching, but due to being busy or the fact that I've had eye inflammation, you can probably see a bit in the eyes at the moment, etc. I've just been watching rather than talking about what has been tickling my fancy recently. And I'm going to start with a second run release, and it is what would be classically first Blu-ray release. The DVDs before that, but this is the first Blu-ray release, and it's Pedro Costa's Horse Money. And Horse Money, well, it follows a main character who is experiencing or going through some sort of reflective state with other people. And you can see my trouble in speaking about this, because I have to say I watched Horse Money and I did not really understand what it was about. It seemed to me that it was a film about like a purgatory state, that the main character was in a purgatory state and he would meet people that had come across his entire life and would explore what they did with them and that kind of stuff. But it was quite obvious that the film was about something else other than that, and for once the special features kind of don't do that. There's a couple of short films, and there's an interview with Costa that the BFI did that, while good, doesn't really delve into what this film is about. Now thankfully, good booklet does help that in some regard. So while the film lost me, I'd say, on first viewing, there's no doubt that I can say that it's a beautiful movie. It's beautifully shot. The lighting in particular is spectacular. The fact that a lot of these actors are not professional actors is quite astounding, because of the quality and believability of the performance that we get with them. But yeah, a difficult watch for me the first time, I have to say. And I know he has other films within the second collection. I know Vitalina Varela's come out, and I do have that. I bought that already, and it stars one of the characters that's in this movie, so it must be a continuation. And so therefore the themes of the occupation, etc., and colonialism were lost on me, I have to say. But it does make me, after reading the booklet, consider that let's go back and watch this again in another year or so and see how we get on. So second run, as usual, produce something that is different from what other labels seem to be releasing. It's challenging cinema, and while I didn't absolutely love it upon first watching, I didn't love it mainly because I didn't really understand what the film was about, and it is very obtuse in its storytelling. It doesn't spell anything out in straight terms, while an awful lot of people do seem to absolutely love this, so you do understand the themes and the message that it's trying to convey. So that was Horse Money. So what better way to follow that up than with, well, one of the classics that I had not seen, and it's an Akira Kurosawa movie, and it is Ikiro. Ikiro, telling the story of a man who finds out that he is basically going to die. He works in the civil service, for a better word, as a clerk. He's the head of department, and he seems to have been existing and just going through his life in the day-to-day humdrum that it tends to, without actually achieving or doing anything. Even his relationship with his son seems to have disintegrated after a while. His wife has departed before him, and it's this revelation that he's going to die is that which kickstarts his new life, and what he's going to do with his final days, and how he sees and treats people, and how he wants to have done something before he goes. And Vinegar is a wonderful movie. It's a really, really lovely, lovely movie. It's maybe doesn't reach the heights that I thought it was going to. It's maybe overly long in its storytelling, but it uses that time well. It seems like a bit of a contradiction in terms, and that it's overly long, but there is definitely this feeling of setting the scene of what his life was before, what it is in the middle as he transitions and deals with the news, and then the bit at the end is actually probably the shortest part of the movie. But yeah, a really wonderful movie, and another one that is just fantastic in terms of Kurosawa's output. especially from that time period, and it is a bit different from it. And I do love the image that they've picked for the front of the film. And as usual, the Criterion discs of the Kurosawa films are fantastic. This has a very long, as many of the other releases do, a very long documentary, which I haven't even got to the end of yet, but they're always really meaty and interesting to get my teeth into. Next was my first foray dipping my toe into Vinegar Syndrome, of which I've picked up a few more since, but it is Dolomite, with Rudy Ray Moore as the lead character, as Dolomite, and it's a blaxploitation film. So if you've seen any blaxploitation films before, you'll kind of know the themes that are thereabouts. But basically, Dolomite gets released from jail to go and sort out an area which is basically become overrun, and they want to find out who's at the top of the chain of the drugs and the crime, etc. that's there, and he gets sent out. And there's no doubt Dolomite is one of the most hammiest pieces of, I wouldn't even say cinema, film that I've seen in a while. Everything's very staged, or feels very staged. None of the dialogue kind of flows well together. There's definitely a tone of, God, if we don't have MF or mother every couple of minutes in here, we're not doing our job right. But somehow, in the midst of all that, you get a pretty enjoyable movie. I do quite like blaxploitation films. I mean, I would even go so far as to say Coffee is kind of in the conversation for the top 20 films I've ever seen, or films that, maybe not greatest films I've ever seen, but favourite films I've ever seen. So I do have some love for the genre, and while this was a bit more, like I say, hammy and staged, I'm looking forward to seeing more in the series. Rudy Ray Moore is an interesting character to be the lead in this, and yeah, so it's fight scenes, there's it kind of needs to seem to be believed. It's a good disc as well. There's a pretty decent well, I would say documentary. It's a making of documentary, but there seems to be throughout the whole series of these, they've like broken it up into bits. So you have Dolomite, part 1, part 2, 3, 4 are in the other films that are in these releases, and yeah, interesting stuff. But that's it's maybe only a 3 out of 5 film, something like that. So don't be getting too excited, but definitely interesting from, as you'll see, the other stuff that I've been watching. I'll very quickly talk about one of my pickups, and I watched the movie, but the movie's not much to write home about, and that is the Arrow Academy release of Trip to the Moon, which was a website special. The Trip to the Moon by Georges Méliès is only a 15-minute movie from the early 20th century, and I've watched the movie, both the black and white version and the colorized version, and I think the colorized version is pretty spectacular in some ways. Like, I really enjoyed what they did with the color in that, and while this was an expensive set for a 15-minute movie, there are multiple video essays and documentaries that are on the Blu-ray as well. I started to watch the video essay of the innovations of Georges Méliès filmmaking, but I still have to work right through that. But with the greatest respect, that's not the bit that people came here for, and you will see that I have not cracked this open yet, but it is the autobiography, the long lost autobiography of Georges Méliès himself, which has got illustrations, etc. inside, and I hope to make my way through that in short time, especially as the nights draw in and the light disappears, and I can make my way through that. So that's Trip to the Moon. A really lovely set. I'm down to my final couple. So I'm going to talk about this film, but also this filmmaker, because I have went down a rabbit hole probably like I have never been down before in quite some time, and that is watching one filmmaker's work and just being utterly and entirely enchanted by each and every single one of them. They are just incredible. And the film is, or the filmmaker is Pedro Almodovar. And the one I'm going to talk about is All About My Mother. This is the Criterion release of it. But I could be talking about any of his films. I I can't get enough of his films. There is something in each and every single one. They are not one note, they are not the same, but they do have similar themes that go through them. All About My Mother tells the story of a young boy who wants to grow up to be a writer, and he is killed at the start of the movie. Bit of a spoiler, but it happens within the first 10 minutes or so of the movie. And at the time, just before he's killed, he wants to know more about his father, because he's living with his mother. The father doesn't seem to be in the scene, and therefore he wants to know. And the mother promises to tell him, and then he gets killed, and it doesn't happen. But so goes the mother to then go and meet the father and tell him that he had a son because he didn't know, etc. And in typical Molliver style, that being the journey that he basically sets up at the start of the movie, he sets up basically the end point of the movie, where it's going to go in many ways, but he then fills everything in between with these weird's the wrong way, like really interesting characters, and more importantly, the types of characters that we don't see an awful lot of in cinema. So there is a lot in this film in particular. It deals with transgender a lot, and about the relationships between transgender people and straight people, and etc, etc. You get the idea. And the one thing that I would say about his films is that subject material seems heavy, but his films never portray them as heavy. They never come across as heavy. They are all told in a very straightforward or in a very whimsical style. There's always real joy in his filmmaking, both in terms of the colour that's on the screen and in terms of the characters that he creates. Your opinions of the characters will change as the films progress. So people that you initially didn't like, you may grow to like. People that you initially liked, you may grow to dislike. There's always something happen in those movies. And I have to say, I picked out All About My Mother because it is my favourite of all the films that I've seen of his recently. But I will say that I've rated them all at least 4.5 out of 5, because they're the type of movie that when I stick on at night, to watch the first half of something, I just can't not finish it. It's just mesmerising. Everything that he has produced so far that I have seen, and I've seen 5 or 6 of his movies now in the past month or so, I'm just so enchanted by it. Just so enchanted, and it's just wonderful. And All About My Mother, again, the characters you just fall in love with because of how they're shown and portrayed, and their honesty and their forthrightedness. And I feel like I should do a separate video on Almodovar when I get finished. I'm going through a few more of his movies. Maybe not to rank them, but maybe talk about why I think his films are so absolutely incredible, and why he's probably jumped ahead of Wes Anderson for my favourite current filmmaker. But that's not the film that I'm going to end on, because a lot of people will know about All About My Mother. But I'm going to talk about another filmmaker who I've enjoyed a few films of recently as well, and that is Francois Ozon, the French filmmaker. And I watched Swimming Pool with Charlotte Rampling recently, and I thought it was great. But the film I want to talk about is France. This is an artificial eye release, and it tells the story of a small German town shortly after World War I, where a young girl and her betrothed family are mourning the loss of both her fiancé and their son. They've taken her in at this difficult time. She's living with them. They want her to kind of move on with her life because she is just mourning the death of Franz himself. And while they're doing that, it appears that there's a mysterious stranger that is appearing at his grave, and it's a young Frenchman being the enemy, so to speak, in the war, and he comes to pay respects at Franz's grave. And what follows is pretty much this incredibly beautiful telling of a friendship and how they seek solace in this person, and the stories that he would tell of how he knew him during the war. There's undercurrents of different storytelling elements within the movie, some of which are resolved, some which aren't, but we have these incredibly emotive performances by the leads that take you on this journey, and again, hypnotised throughout the entire run of time of the film. It's an absolutely amazing movie. It's shot mainly in black and white, bar for a few colour sequences that pervade their way through at very key points. And again, another film where you fall for the characters. You want to see more of the characters. The father and the mother who have lost their son, how they grasp onto each little nugget and story and telling of how their son was and who he was to somebody else, that he was important to other people, is lovely, and you can just see it etched all over their faces. And for its 2 hours runtime or whatever, it is just, again, I couldn't take my eyes off it. And it is not a film that I hear anybody talk about. It is not a film that I see many people speaking about. And as probably said before, I don't really like period pieces, or I didn't. But I'm starting to change my tune, I have to say, because some of the period pieces that I have seen recently have been so wonderfully nuanced in the emotional storytelling that they've done, that I just couldn't help but fall for what was here. And that is my catalogue of what I've been watching for the past week or so. I encourage you to tell me what you've been watching, what you've been doing, and I'll catch you all again soon. Okay, speak to you soon. All the best. Bye.